What if your constant striving, endless planning, obsessive worrying, and relentless pursuit have become the invisible wall standing between you and the very life you desire? What you pursue with obsession often escapes you, while what you release has a strange way of finding its path back. For thousands of years, the wisest minds on earth guarded one forbidden principle. The secret to gaining everything begins by stopping the desperate need to gain anything. This is not superstition. It is one of humanity's oldest and most guarded discoveries. In this journey, you'll discover why attachment creates resistance, why surrender is different from giving up, why ancient masters rarely chased anything, and why the final secret of the backwards law may completely change how you approach every goal for the rest of your life. Chapter 1: The Great Paradox. Why desire becomes an obstacle. There is an ancient saying preserved across many wisdom traditions, though expressed in different words. The one who desperately chases the butterfly frightens it away. The one who sits quietly in the garden often finds it resting gently upon his shoulder. This is the backwards law. Its simplicity conceals extraordinary depth. Human instinct insists that greater effort always produces greater results. Push harder, want more, hold tighter, control every outcome. Yet the ancient masters repeatedly observed that some of life's greatest treasures refuse to appear under the pressure of desperation. Sleep cannot be forced. Love cannot be demanded. Peace cannot be conquered. Wisdom cannot be rushed. The harder one grasps, the more elusive these gifts become. Buddhist teachers explain this through attachment. Taoist sages described it as resistance to the natural flow. Hermetic philosophers observed that inner tension reflects outward. Socrates questioned whether certainty itself prevents discovery. Different traditions. One paradox. Imagine trying to smooth the surface of a quiet lake with your hands. Every movement creates more ripples. The very effort intended to produce calm becomes the source of disturbance. So it is with much of human striving. Desire itself is not the problem. Without aspiration, no civilization would have flourished, no child would learn, and no artist would create. The obstacle appears when desire quietly transforms into psychological dependence. I cannot be happy until I will finally be enough when. Everything changes in those few words. The mind has postponed peace. It has placed fulfillment somewhere beyond the present moment. Psychology increasingly recognizes this pattern. Attention naturally follows perceived absence. When the mind repeatedly emphasizes what is missing, it trains itself to notice deficiency everywhere. Gratitude fades into the background, while lack occupies the foreground. Perception begins serving craving. Eventually, wanting becomes an identity. Ancient teachers noticed another hidden consequence. The more desperately people pursued an outcome, the more anxious their behavior became. Anxiety narrowed perception. Narrow perception reduced wise choices. Poor choices delayed the very goal they sought. The cycle fed itself. The harder they pushed, the greater the resistance they experienced. Consider an archer preparing for an important competition in ancient China. A village master once observed that when the young archer practiced alone, his arrows flew with remarkable precision. But when offered a golden prize before the crowd, his hands began trembling. The bow remained the same. The target remained the same. Only attachment had changed. His fear of losing became greater than his love of shooting. Desire had become interference. This subtle shift explains why many extraordinary performances occur when individuals become completely absorbed in the activity itself rather than obsessing over the reward. Presence replaces pressure. Action becomes effortless. Skill flows naturally because attention remains with the process instead of racing toward the outcome. The Taoists called this Wu Wei, effort without strain. The backwards law does not encourage passivity. It encourages freedom from desperation. There is a profound difference. A farmer plants seeds with care, waters them faithfully, removes weeds patiently, and trusts the seasons. He does not dig up the soil every evening to see whether the roots are growing. Healthy effort acts. Desperate effort controls. One cooperates with reality. The other struggles against it. The ancients also understood that craving often disguises fear. Behind the desire for wealth may hide fear of insecurity. Behind endless achievement may hide fear of insignificance. Behind constant approval may hide fear of rejection. Release the fear, and desire often softens into healthy intention. This is true freedom. Freedom is not having everything one wants. Freedom is no longer needing every outcome to unfold exactly as imagined before allowing oneself to experience peace. Paradoxically, this inner release often improves external results. Calm people notice opportunities that anxious minds overlook. Flexible people adapt more wisely than rigid ones. Those free from panic make clearer decisions. The universe has not suddenly changed. The person has. And because the person changes, their experience of life begins changing with them. This is the quiet mystery that fascinated generations of ancient sages. When striving relaxes into purposeful action, when grasping becomes gratitude, when fear gives way to trust, life often begins moving with us instead of against us. An old account preserved in Chinese philosophical tradition tells of a farmer who grew impatient while waiting for his rice plants to mature. Believing they were growing too slowly, he walked through his field and gently pulled each young shoot upward, convinced he was helping nature accomplish its work more quickly. Proud of his effort, he hurried home and announced to his family, "Today, I have helped my crops grow." The next morning they returned to the field. Every shoot had withered. His effort had destroyed the very harvest he longed to accelerate. For centuries, teachers used this simple story to illustrate one of life's deepest truths. Growth cannot be forced without being harmed. Whether cultivating crops, wisdom, relationships, character, or inner peace, every meaningful transformation unfolds according to rhythms deeper than impatience can command. The wise farmer still plants. He still waters. He still works diligently, but he does not pull at the roots. He trusts that life knows how to grow when given faithful care. So too does the human soul. Sometimes the greatest progress begins the moment we stop trying to force what only patience, awareness, and quiet inner transformation can bring. Chapter 2. The Ancient Art of Trusting Time. There is a season for every purpose beneath heaven. A time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to embrace, a time to release. Nature never apologized for moving slowly. Only human beings became impatient with wisdom. Modern life quietly convinces us that speed equals progress. We celebrate instant communication, overnight success, immediate pleasure, and rapid achievement. Yet the soul has never learned to move at the pace of machines. It still grows like forests. It still heals like broken bones. It still matures through seasons rather than moments. The Taoist sages understood this deeply. Laozi compared the wise person to water. Water never forces its path through mountains. It does not compete with stone. Patiently, quietly, almost invisibly, it shapes entire landscapes. What appears weak eventually transforms what seems immovable. Force exhausts itself. Patience outlives everything. Many people mistake waiting for passivity. Ancient wisdom teaches something entirely different. Waiting is not doing nothing. Waiting is remaining faithful while invisible work unfolds. Consider the farmer. After placing seeds into the earth, he cannot command them to sprout tomorrow. Digging them up each morning would only destroy the very life he hopes to cultivate. Instead, he waters the soil, protects the field, removes weeds, and trusts processes he cannot control. The harvest belongs to time. Our lives follow the same hidden law. Relationships mature through shared years, not hurried promises. Character forms through repeated choices, not dramatic declarations. Wisdom arrives after countless quiet reflections, not through one extraordinary insight. Yet the restless mind continually whispers another message. Faster, more now. The ancient teachers recognized that endless craving creates endless dissatisfaction. Desire itself is not the enemy. It becomes destructive only when it refuses to honor the natural rhythm of becoming. There is an old Eastern tale about a traveler searching for a legendary peach tree whose fruit granted lasting contentment. Every village pointed him farther ahead. It grows beyond the next mountain. After months of exhausting travel, he finally reached an elderly gardener tending a simple orchard. "I have searched for the tree of contentment," the traveler announced. The old man smiled and handed him an ordinary peach. "This one? No," the traveler protested. "I seek the extraordinary fruit." The gardener laughed softly. Every fruit becomes extraordinary when the hunger for another disappears. The traveler remained silent. For the first time in years, he tasted what he already possessed, instead of chasing what remained distant. That single meal nourished him more deeply than countless feasts. The greatest hunger had never belonged to the body. It belonged to the mind. Modern psychology describes a similar phenomenon through what researchers often call hedonic adaptation. New possessions, achievements, or pleasures often provide only temporary satisfaction before becoming the new normal. The mind quickly adjusts and begins seeking another source of fulfillment. The ancients understood this without laboratories. They simply watched kings. History offers countless rulers who conquered neighboring kingdoms only to begin planning another campaign before celebrating the previous victory. Wealth multiplied, yet peace remained absent. Palaces expanded while contentment quietly retreated. Desire without understanding has no finish line. Like drinking from the sea, every attempt to satisfy endless craving creates greater thirst. The Taoist masters offered another path. Instead of asking, "How can I gain more?" they asked, "What happens when I stop believing I lack something essential?" That question changes everything. Contentment does not eliminate ambition, it purifies it. When action grows from gratitude rather than desperation, effort becomes joyful instead of exhausting. Success becomes meaningful rather than addictive. Achievement becomes an expression of fullness instead of an attempt to repair emptiness. This is why simplicity has always been associated with abundance. A person needing little possesses quiet freedom. A person needing everything remains endlessly dependent upon circumstances. One of the greatest illusions of modern civilization is believing abundance begins with accumulation. Ancient wisdom gently reverses the equation. Abundance begins with appreciation. Notice the elderly craftsman who carefully repairs an old wooden chair instead of replacing it. Observe the grandmother who prepares a simple meal with reverence because she remembers seasons when food was scarce. Watch the shepherd who greets sunrise with gratitude, although he owns little more than the land beneath his feet. They have discovered something markets cannot manufacture. Enough. Enough is one of the most powerful words the soul can learn. It breaks the spell of endless wanting. The Hebrew sages repeatedly reminded their students that anxiety cannot lengthen life by a single moment. Worry often attempts to force tomorrow before today's work has been completed. Faith chooses another posture. Faith prepares. Faith remains attentive. Faith continues acting wisely without demanding immediate results. The bamboo offers another lesson. For years after planting, almost nothing appears above the ground. Many assume the seed has failed. Yet beneath the surface, an extraordinary root system quietly develops. When growth finally becomes visible, it happens with astonishing speed because invisible preparation has already been completed. Human transformation follows the same mystery. Months of unnoticed discipline suddenly become visible as confidence. Years of quiet forgiveness appear as emotional freedom. Countless ordinary choices eventually become extraordinary character. The unseen always precedes the seen. Perhaps this explains why the greatest teachers across civilizations spoke so often about patience. They were not asking people merely to wait. They were inviting them to trust reality itself. The universe possesses rhythms older than human ambition. The wisest life learns to cooperate rather than compete with them. Instead of forcing unopened doors, prepare yourself for the moment they naturally open. Instead of fearing slow progress, remember that mountains themselves were shaped one season at a time. The deepest transformations rarely announce themselves. They unfold quietly, like dawn replacing darkness, like spring awakening frozen earth, like wisdom entering a heart that has finally stopped rushing toward tomorrow. Trusting time is not surrendering your purpose. It is surrendering unnecessary struggle. Life ripens when we do. Chapter 3. The Hermetic Mirror. Why reality never lies. Among the oldest surviving fragments of Hermetic wisdom appears a mysterious sentence that has fascinated seekers for centuries. As within, so without. As above, so below. The world often reflects the quality of the consciousness observing it. This is not to suggest that every external event is magically created by thought alone. Storms still arrive. Illness still visits. Other people still possess their own choices. Rather, Hermetic philosophy points toward a subtler truth. Our inner condition profoundly shapes what we notice, how we interpret events, and how we respond to life's unfolding circumstances. The mirror responds. Imagine standing before a polished mirror while frowning. No amount of arguing changes the reflection. The mirror simply returns what stands before it. Life often behaves similarly. Fear notices danger before opportunity. Trust notices possibility before limitation. Resentment remembers every insult. Gratitude remembers every kindness. The external world has not completely changed. The observer has. The corpus hermeticum repeatedly directs the seeker inward before outward. The ancient initiates understood that consciousness itself was the first field requiring cultivation. A disordered mind creates confused choices. Clear awareness produces clearer action. Outer harmony begins invisibly. Consider two travelers entering the same unfamiliar city. One arrives convinced strangers cannot be trusted. Every serious face confirms his suspicion. Every delayed conversation appears unfriendly. Every misunderstanding becomes proof that the world is hostile. The second traveler enters with quiet openness. He notices helpful merchants. He receives unexpected kindness. He discovers generous neighbors eager to offer directions. Both walked identical streets, yet they inhabited entirely different worlds. Their assumptions became silent architects of experience. Modern psychology increasingly recognizes similar patterns. Human attention naturally filters enormous amounts of information, often favoring what aligns with existing expectations and beliefs. What we repeatedly anticipate can influence what we notice, remember, and how we behave. The ancients reached similar insights through observation rather than experiments. They watched human nature. There is an old Hermetic legend about an apprentice who traveled to a hidden temple seeking the secret of transformation. After months of climbing through barren mountains, he finally stood before the temple gates. An elderly master welcomed him with unexpected simplicity. Instead of revealing sacred scrolls, the master handed him a bronze mirror. "Study this." For several days, the young student stared into it, becoming increasingly frustrated. "I came seeking hidden wisdom," he complained. "You received it," replied the teacher. "I see only myself." The old initiate nodded. "And until you truly understand the one who looks into the mirror, every mystery beyond this room will remain hidden." Only years later did the apprentice understand. The greatest mystery had never been concealed inside the temple. It had always been concealed inside the observer. Every fear colored his perception. Every hidden resentment shaped his judgment. Every quiet belief influenced his decisions. As his inner life became more ordered, the outer world gradually appeared different. Not because reality itself had magically changed, but because he finally related to it with greater clarity, courage, and wisdom. That is the true Hermetic mirror. Each morning, before meeting the world, pause for a single question. What am I bringing into today? Fear? Gratitude? Bitterness? Curiosity? Hope? The answer quietly influences every conversation, every decision, every opportunity you recognize, and every obstacle you face. The ancient masters never claimed the mirror always reflects instantly. Some reflections require seasons. Character grows slowly. Trust develops patiently. Habits reshape destiny one ordinary day at a time. Yet the principle remains astonishingly consistent. The outer life often echoes the inner one. When the mind becomes calmer, decisions become wiser. When resentment softens, relationships often begin healing. When courage replaces avoidance, new possibilities gradually emerge. The mirror responds, not through magic, but through the profound relationship between consciousness, perception, and action. The Hermetic path, therefore, begins where every lasting transformation begins, not with controlling the world, but with learning to see clearly the one standing before the mirror. Chapter 4. Gnostic Awakening. When the search ends, the truth appears. Many people imagine awakening as discovering something entirely new. The Gnostics suggested something far more surprising. Awakening is often remembering what has quietly been forgotten. They spoke of a divine spark, a hidden light residing within every human being. It was not something to be earned through status, wealth, or recognition. It could not be purchased, inherited, or bestowed by another person. It was already present, though often concealed beneath layers of fear, habit, distraction, and mistaken identity. Imagine an ancient mirror forgotten inside a temple for centuries. Dust gathers year after year until no reflection remains visible. A passerby might conclude that the mirror has lost its nature. Yet the mirror has never ceased being a mirror. It simply requires cleaning. The human soul, the Gnostics believed, is much the same. Modern life encourages endless acquisition, more success, more possessions, more approval, more achievements. Every accomplishment promises that satisfaction waits just one step farther ahead. Yet countless people discover that after reaching one summit, another immediately appears. The horizon keeps retreating. The Gnostic teachers questioned this endless pursuit. They asked whether the hunger itself might be pointing toward something deeper than another possession. What if the longing beneath every ambition is not for another achievement, but for reunion with the deepest part of oneself? Psychologically, this insight remains remarkably relevant. Much of human striving arises from a quiet belief that something essential is missing. People seek relationships to complete them, careers to validate them, or recognition to prove their worth. Yet when identity depends entirely upon external circumstances, peace becomes fragile because circumstances continually change. The Gnostics invited their students to reverse the search. Instead of asking, what must I acquire to become whole? Ask instead, what within me has been forgotten beneath fear? The answer rarely arrives through noise. It appears during silence. It emerges when comparison ceases. It becomes visible when the mind stops running long enough to notice what has quietly remained unchanged through every season of life. They called this awakening gnosis, not mere intellectual knowledge, but direct inner knowing. One may memorize every sacred text and still remain asleep. Another may possess little formal learning and yet live with profound awareness because truth has become experience rather than information. This distinction changes everything. Knowledge fills the mind. Awareness transforms the person. Perhaps this explains why so many ancient initiates withdrew into deserts, mountains, caves, and solitude. They were not escaping the world. They were escaping the constant noise that prevented them from hearing themselves. The greatest discoveries often happen in silence. The modern mind fears stillness because stillness reveals what distraction hides. Old griefs, unspoken fears, forgotten dreams, yet beneath all of them lies something remarkably peaceful. The Gnostics believed that this quiet center is closer to our true nature than the restless personality that constantly seeks validation. When people begin living from this deeper center, their relationship with life gradually changes. Success becomes an expression rather than a necessity. Love becomes generosity rather than dependence. Work becomes service rather than endless competition. Nothing external has changed. Everything internal has. That is the beginning of awakening. There is another subtle lesson hidden within Gnostic thought. The divine spark is not merely a private treasure. It quietly changes how one sees others. If the same sacred light exists within every person, then compassion naturally replaces judgment. Envy loses its grip because another person's success no longer threatens one's own identity. Forgiveness becomes possible because beneath human weakness lies a deeper dignity waiting to be remembered. Inner awakening quietly transforms outer relationships. This is why the Gnostics insisted that self-knowledge precedes wisdom. Until a person knows the source from which they live, every external pursuit risks becoming another attempt to fill an inner emptiness that possessions were never designed to satisfy. The kingdom within is not an escape from reality. It is the foundation from which reality is finally seen clearly. Chapter 5: Socrates and the Hidden Strength of Humility. Among all the remarkable men who walked the streets of ancient Greece, none appeared less extraordinary than Socrates. He wore no magnificent robes. He possessed no palace. He wrote no books with his own hand. He spent his days walking through the crowded marketplaces of Athens, stopping merchants, soldiers, poets, craftsmen, and politicians with questions so simple that they often unsettled the people who believed themselves to be wise. One sentence became forever attached to his name: "I know that I know nothing." At first hearing, those words sound like defeat. In truth, they were the beginning of freedom. Many people spend their lives imprisoned by certainty. They become convinced they understand exactly who they are, exactly how life works, exactly what tomorrow will bring, and exactly what other people think about them. These assumptions quietly become invisible walls. Every new experience is forced to fit old conclusions. Every unexpected opportunity is dismissed because it does not resemble what the mind already believes. Socrates recognized a danger hidden inside certainty. A cup already filled cannot receive fresh water. That simple image has echoed through countless wisdom traditions because it speaks to something timeless. A mind overflowing with rigid opinions leaves little room for discovery, yet a humble mind remains alive. It continues learning long after others have stopped asking questions. Empty cups learn. The oracle at Delphi once declared Socrates the wisest man in Greece. Rather than accepting the praise, he became deeply puzzled. He believed many others possessed greater knowledge than he did. Determined to understand the oracle's meaning, he began questioning respected citizens throughout Athens. He spoke with politicians who believed they understood justice. He questioned poets celebrated for their brilliance. He visited craftsmen admired for their extraordinary skills. Again and again, he discovered the same pattern. Many possessed genuine expertise in one area, yet assumed that expertise made them wise in everything else. Their confidence exceeded their understanding. Socrates reached an astonishing conclusion. Perhaps the oracle considered him wise, not because he knew more than others, but because he recognized the limits of his own knowledge. Humility became wisdom. Modern psychology continues to uncover a similar truth. Human beings naturally prefer certainty because uncertainty creates discomfort. The mind often rushes to quick conclusions simply to escape the uneasy feeling of not knowing. Yet those premature conclusions frequently distort reality. How many friendships have been damaged because someone assumed another person's silence meant rejection? How many opportunities have been abandoned because failure seemed inevitable before the journey even began? How many fears were created entirely by stories the mind invented? The ancient philosopher understood that assumptions often become invisible chains. Questions become keys. There is an old Greek story about a young student eager to study under a famous philosopher. Arriving full of confidence, he proudly explained everything he had already learned. He spoke without pause about mathematics, politics, philosophy, astronomy, and ethics. The elderly teacher listened patiently. When the young man finally stopped speaking, the master filled 2 cups with wine. The first cup quickly overflowed. Still, the old man continued pouring. Wine spilled across the table and onto the floor. the student finally interrupted. "The cup is already full," the philosopher smiled gently. "So are you." Silence filled the room. Return when you are ready to learn instead of ready to impress. The student left embarrassed. Years later, he would describe that afternoon as the true beginning of his education. Life often teaches through emptying. Before filling, failure empties pride. Loss empties illusion. Age empties arrogance. Experience quietly removes the certainty youth sometimes mistakes for wisdom. This is why many older people possess a peaceful confidence different from youthful certainty. They no longer pretend to have every answer. They have learned that life continually reveals deeper questions. That humility creates extraordinary freedom. Imagine entering every conversation, believing you might discover something valuable. Imagine approaching disagreement with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Imagine greeting unexpected change with the question, "What is this trying to teach me?" The entire quality of experience changes. Curiosity dissolves unnecessary conflict. The ego constantly seeks confirmation. Wisdom seeks understanding. There is a profound psychological difference between these two pursuits. The ego protects identity. Curiosity transforms identity. One remains trapped inside familiar beliefs. The other continues expanding. Socrates rarely lectured. He asked. His questions became mirrors in which others could observe themselves. He knew genuine wisdom cannot simply be handed from one person to another. It must awaken within. Every honest question becomes an invitation. Who am I beneath my titles? Which fears quietly guide my decisions? What assumptions have I never examined? Which beliefs belong to direct experience, and which have I merely inherited? Questions like these open doors no argument ever can. Ancient philosophy repeatedly teaches that the greatest journey is inward. The traveler who crosses oceans may still remain a stranger to himself, yet the one who courageously examines his own heart begins discovering treasures hidden since childhood. Knowledge fills memory. Self-knowledge transforms life. Perhaps this explains why Socrates remained calm even when condemned to death. He had spent an entire lifetime practicing truth instead of merely collecting information. His identity rested upon inquiry rather than certainty. Nothing could imprison a mind that remained open. The greatest obstacle to wisdom has never been ignorance. It has always been the illusion of already knowing. Every sunrise quietly asks us the same question. Will you defend yesterday's conclusions, or will you become teachable once again? The path of wisdom begins not with answers. It begins with wonder. Long after Socrates drank the cup that ended his earthly life, travelers continued telling stories about the old philosopher who preferred questions over certainty. One such account tells of a wealthy merchant who journeyed across Greece hoping to collect wisdom as he collected rare treasures. When he finally met an elderly student who had once walked beside Socrates, he proudly displayed scrolls filled with knowledge gathered from distant lands. "I have collected the finest teachings in the world," the merchant declared. The old disciple listened quietly before leading him to a peaceful spring. He dipped an empty clay bowl into the water and offered it to the traveler. The merchant drank deeply. "Why was the water so refreshing?" asked the old man. "Because the bowl was empty," the merchant replied. The disciple smiled. "Then remember this for the rest of your life. The spring never refuses to give. Only the full bowl refuses to receive." The merchant returned home, carrying fewer certainties than when he had departed. yet possessing far greater wisdom. For the remainder of his years, whenever someone praised his intelligence, he would simply smile and say, "The greatest lesson I ever learned was how to empty my cup." Chapter 6. The Invisible Prison of Desire. There exists a prison whose walls cannot be seen. The ancient sages called this prison attachment. It begins with a single thought: "I cannot be whole until I possess this." The object changes from person to person. For one, it is wealth; for another, recognition; for another, perfect health, lasting youth, endless approval, or complete certainty about the future. The mind quietly builds its identity around what it believes is missing. Soon, life itself becomes postponed. I will finally be happy when, I will finally rest after, I will finally become enough once. The sentence never ends because desire continually invents another destination. The ancient teachers carefully distinguished between wanting and needing. Wanting can inspire healthy action. Needing often creates emotional dependence. A traveler may desire shelter during a storm, but if he believes only a palace can bring peace, even a safe cottage feels insufficient. The prison was never the weather. It was the belief. Ancient Buddhist teachers observed this with remarkable clarity. Suffering does not arise simply because pleasant things pass away. It grows because the mind insists they should never change. The tighter we cling, the more painful every change becomes. Imagine holding a bird in your hands. Grip too tightly, and you injure what you hope to protect. Hold too loosely, and it naturally flies when its time arrives. Love requires open hands. So does peace. Psychologically, attachment often disguises itself as identity. I am successful only if others admire me. I am valuable only if I never fail. I am lovable only if everyone approves. These invisible beliefs quietly direct every decision. People begin protecting an imagined identity instead of living authentically. Fear becomes their constant companion. The ancient masters noticed another hidden danger. Every attachment gives external circumstances authority over inner peace. If your happiness depends entirely upon praise, criticism becomes devastating. If your worth depends upon possessions, loss becomes unbearable. If your identity depends upon certainty, every unexpected change feels like disaster. Freedom begins the moment the center of gravity moves inward. There is an old tale from the deserts of the Near East about a man carrying a heavy chest filled with gold. Bandits constantly pursued him. Every sound frightened him. Every stranger appeared suspicious. Exhausted, he encountered an elderly wanderer sitting peacefully beneath a solitary tree. "What treasure do you guard so carefully?" the old man asked. "My entire fortune. And who owns whom?" The traveler frowned. "I own the gold." The wanderer gently shook his head. "If that were true, you could leave it behind." Those words struck harder than any sword. The traveler suddenly realized he no longer carried the treasure. The treasure carried him. Many people live exactly this way, not only with money, with opinions, with status, with memories, with regrets, with imagined futures. The burden changes form, but the prison remains the same. The great liberation begins with a simple realization. You can deeply appreciate something without believing your existence depends upon it. You can love without possessing. You can work without becoming consumed by results. You can dream without becoming imprisoned by outcomes. This is not indifference. It is freedom. Ironically, those who cling least often experience life most fully. Their relationships breathe. Their work becomes creative. Their joy no longer depends upon perfect circumstances. When identity is no longer built upon lack, the soul discovers a quiet abundance that external success alone can never provide. The invisible prison opens from the inside. No guard unlocks its gates. No king grants permission. Freedom begins the moment we stop asking life to complete us and begin allowing life to reveal what was already whole within. Chapter 7. The Ancient Hebrew Wisdom of Seasons. To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. These words were never merely about calendars or changing weather. They described the hidden rhythm of existence itself. Birth and farewell, planting and harvest, joy and mourning, speaking and silence. Every experience arrived with its own appointed season, and wisdom began when people stopped demanding that every season resemble spring. Modern life rarely honors this truth. People expect immediate success, instant healing, effortless relationships, and permanent happiness. When life unfolds more slowly, they assume something has gone wrong. Yet the ancients observed nature carefully, and nature never rushed. The oak tree did not envy the wildflower. The river did not compete with the mountain. Each fulfilled its purpose according to its own time. There is profound peace hidden inside that observation. Imagine a farmer planting wheat in early autumn. After covering the seeds with soil, he does not return the following morning with disappointment, because nothing appears above the ground. He understands something invisible is already happening beneath the earth. Roots begin long before green shoots greet the sun. Life often unfolds in the same quiet manner. The most important transformations usually begin where no one can see them. Patience is not passive waiting. It is confident participation in processes that cannot be hurried. The ancient Hebrew sages repeatedly reminded their students that every season carries its own gift. Spring teaches hope. Summer teaches diligence. Autumn teaches gratitude. Winter teaches trust. Most people celebrate spring and resist winter. Wisdom embraces both. Psychologically, much suffering grows from resisting the season we currently occupy. Someone experiencing loss wishes life would immediately return to joy. A young apprentice longs for the harvest before learning the discipline of planting. A person beginning again compares today's small progress with another person's finished success. Comparison blinds us to timing. The soul matures gradually. A child cannot become an elder overnight. Neither can character. Ancient teachers knew that impatience often disguises itself as fear. Beneath the constant urge to hurry lies a quiet anxiety whispering, "What if my time never comes?" That fear pushes people to force doors that are not yet ready to open. They abandon meaningful paths because visible results have not arrived quickly enough. They uproot seeds before roots have finished growing. Yet nature offers another lesson. Fruit ripens only when its season has fully arrived. Pulled too early, it remains bitter. Left patiently upon the branch, sweetness appears naturally. Human lives follow similar rhythms. A craftsman spends years shaping his skill before becoming a master. A friendship deepens through countless ordinary conversations rather than one dramatic moment. Wisdom itself grows quietly through repeated experiences that often seem insignificant while they are happening. Nothing lasting is rushed. An old Hebrew saying reminds us that the race is not always to the swift. Speed and timing are not identical. Some of the greatest accomplishments in history appeared only after decades of invisible preparation. The ancient sages, therefore, encouraged people to ask a different question. Instead of asking, "Why has this not happened yet?" ask, "What is this season preparing me to become?" That single question transforms frustration into curiosity. Perhaps delay is teaching endurance. Perhaps silence is cultivating discernment. Perhaps uncertainty is strengthening trust. The season itself becomes the teacher. There is an old story told among desert travelers about a young shepherd who grew impatient watching older shepherds calmly wait for distant rains. Day after day, he climbed the surrounding hills, searching the horizon for dark clouds. "They are too slow," he complained. "I will find greener land." Ignoring the counsel of the elders, he drove his flock into unfamiliar wilderness. For several days the grass appeared abundant. Then the streams disappeared, the earth hardened beneath the blazing sun. Unable to find water, he nearly lost everything he possessed before finally returning, exhausted, to the valley he had abandoned. There he discovered something remarkable. The rains had quietly arrived exactly where the older shepherds had patiently remained. One elderly shepherd welcomed him without judgment. "You tried to outrun the season," he said gently. "But seasons cannot be outrun." The young man never forgot those words. As years passed, he became known for extraordinary patience. Whenever younger shepherds grew restless, he would simply point toward the fields turning green after the rains and smile. The earth always keeps its appointments. So does life. This ancient wisdom does not encourage passivity. Farmers still plant. Builders still build. Travelers still walk their roads. Yet they also understand something equally important. Some outcomes belong to time itself. Faithful effort is our responsibility. Ripening belongs to the season. When this truth settles into the heart, anxiety begins losing its authority. We continue acting wisely, but we no longer measure our worth by immediate results. We trust that unseen growth often precedes visible change. The ancient Hebrew sages understood something many modern minds forget. Life is not merely a collection of moments. It is a sacred unfolding. Honor the season you are living. Its purpose may not yet be fully visible, but its wisdom is already quietly shaping you. Generations after these teachings first echoed through Israel, travelers often spoke of an elderly vineyard keeper who lived among the hills near Jerusalem. Every year, young workers questioned why he never became anxious when vines appeared slow to bear fruit. One impatient laborer finally asked, "Do you never fear the harvest will fail?" The old keeper knelt beside a vine and gently touched its roots beneath the soil. "I have learned to watch what cannot yet be seen." Years later, when the young worker inherited the vineyard, he repeated the same lesson to his own children. The vine teaches the same wisdom every season. The fruit appears only after the roots have finished their hidden work. And those who heard him understood that the lesson had never been about vineyards alone. Chapter 8. Faith without desperation. There is a profound difference between faith and desperation. Though from a distance they can appear almost identical. Both hope, both wait, both long for change, yet one stands peacefully upon solid ground, while the other trembles beneath the weight of fear. The ancients understood this difference well. They observed that desperation constantly asks, "What if everything falls apart?" Faith quietly whispers, "Whatever comes, I will meet it with wisdom." The outward circumstances may remain exactly the same. The inner experience becomes completely different. Many people imagine faith as intense emotion or blind certainty that life will unfold exactly according to personal wishes. Yet ancient wisdom traditions rarely described faith in this way. Instead, faith was portrayed as calm confidence, rooted in something deeper than changing circumstances. It was less about predicting the future than about trusting one's ability to walk through whatever future arrived. Imagine two sailors preparing to cross the sea. Both encounter identical winds. Both face the same waves. One panics each time clouds gather, convinced disaster is certain. The other adjusts his sails, watches the horizon carefully, and continues steering with quiet attention. Neither controls the weather. Only one controls his relationship with it. Faith resembles the second sailor. Psychology increasingly supports this ancient insight. People who develop psychological flexibility are better able to navigate uncertainty without becoming overwhelmed by it. Rather than demanding complete control over life, they adapt, respond, and remain open to changing circumstances. Rigidity breaks, flexibility endures. The mind trapped in anxiety constantly rehearses futures that have never happened. It mistakes imagination for certainty. Every possibility becomes a prediction. Every delay becomes failure. Every silence becomes rejection. The body responds as though imagined danger were already real. Ancient teachers recognized this long before modern science described it. They encouraged students to return repeatedly to the present moment, where most imagined catastrophes had not actually occurred. Faith lives here. Anxiety lives elsewhere. This does not mean ignoring difficulties. Storms still arrive. Loss still hurts. Questions remain unanswered. Faith simply refuses to multiply suffering through endless resistance. It replaces frantic control with steady participation. There is another hidden danger in desperation. It often pushes people to abandon their deepest values. Fear persuades them to compromise integrity for quick success. Impatience encourages shortcuts. Panic clouds discernment. The desperate mind mistakes movement for progress. The faithful mind understands that the right direction matters more than frantic speed. Consider an archer drawing a bow. If his hands tremble with urgency, the arrow rarely reaches its target. Only calm attention allows precise action. Stillness guides strength. The same principle governs ordinary life. A peaceful decision usually travels farther than an anxious reaction. Ancient Taoist masters compared faith to floating upon a great river. The swimmer who fights every current quickly becomes exhausted. The wise traveler learns the rhythm of the water, conserving strength while moving steadily toward the destination. This is not surrender to helplessness. It is cooperation with reality. The paradox is beautiful. Those who stop forcing often begin accomplishing more, because clarity replaces panic. There is an old tale told along the ancient caravan routes about two merchants crossing a vast desert. Both carried precious goods destined for a distant city. The first constantly worried. Every delay convinced him disaster approached. Each evening, he urged the caravan leader to travel through the darkness, fearing they would otherwise never arrive. The second merchant remained attentive but calm. He cared for his animals, shared water with weary travelers, and trusted the experience of the seasoned guides. One night, the anxious merchant secretly departed ahead of the caravan, hoping to gain time. Before dawn, he lost the trail. The desert offered no landmarks. By midday, he wandered in circles beneath the blazing sun, until the caravan eventually found him exhausted and frightened. The older guide said nothing until they reached safety. Then he quietly remarked, Your greatest danger was never the desert. It was your fear of the desert. Those words remained with the merchant for the rest of his life. From that day forward, whenever challenges appeared, he reminded himself that calm often sees paths invisible to panic. Years later, younger traders sought his advice before their own journeys. He would smile gently and tell them, "Walk faithfully. Do not race fear. The road reveals itself to those who travel with steady hearts." That wisdom continues to echo across the centuries. Faith is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the quiet courage to continue walking without allowing uncertainty to rule the heart. Calm expectation strengthens perception. Inner confidence steadies action. And a peaceful soul often arrives where desperate striving never could. Chapter 9. The Courage to Release Outcomes. The greatest paradox hidden within ancient wisdom is this: the moment we stop clinging to an outcome, we often become far more capable of achieving it. This truth appears across civilizations separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. Taoist sages called it effortless action. Buddhist teachers described freedom from attachment. Hermetic philosophers spoke of inner harmony preceding outer order. Even the oldest storytellers observed that those who grasped too tightly often lost what they sought, while those who acted with quiet confidence found doors opening in unexpected ways. At first, this seems backwards. Modern culture teaches the opposite. We are told to control every detail, predict every outcome, and measure our worth by visible results. Success becomes an obsession rather than a direction. Every delay feels like failure. Every obstacle becomes proof that life is working against us. Yet the ancients looked toward nature instead of anxiety. A river never struggles to reach the sea. It simply continues flowing. Its persistence comes not from desperation but from its nature. Human beings often forget this. Imagine a gardener who plants an orchard in fertile ground. Every morning he waters the young trees with care. He removes weeds, enriches the soil, and protects the fragile branches from harsh winds. His work is deliberate and faithful. But suppose that every evening he becomes consumed by worry. He pulls gently at the saplings, hoping to make them grow faster. He digs around the roots to see whether progress has begun. He curses the sky because fruit has not appeared within a week. His effort eventually destroys what patience would have allowed to flourish. The problem was never his work, it was his attachment. Action nourishes, obsession suffocates. This distinction changes the way we approach nearly every part of life. Many people enter relationships desperately seeking validation rather than offering genuine companionship. Their fear of rejection quietly shapes every conversation. Instead of listening, they perform. Instead of serving, they seek constant reassurance. Ironically, the very anxiety intended to preserve the relationship slowly weakens it. The same pattern appears in careers. Someone desperately chasing recognition often sacrifices integrity for approval. Another person quietly dedicates themselves to meaningful work, continually refining their craft without allowing praise or criticism to determine their identity. Years later, it is often the second person whose influence quietly endures. Why? Because service creates excellence. Obsession creates exhaustion. Ancient philosophers repeatedly return to one essential principle: you control your effort. You never fully control the outcome. This truth is not discouraging, it is liberating. Once we recognize where our responsibility ends, enormous mental energy becomes available for what truly matters. Psychologically, attachment often arises from an illusion that our identity depends upon success. We quietly begin believing statements such as, "If I fail, I am a failure," or "If this opportunity disappears, my future disappears with it." These assumptions imprison the mind. The ancient teachers challenged them directly. They reminded students that identity grows from character rather than circumstance. A harvest may fail. Integrity need not. A business may collapse. Wisdom can remain. Health may weaken. Compassion can continue growing. The deepest treasures cannot be confiscated by changing fortunes. This understanding gradually transforms fear into freedom. You begin acting from purpose rather than panic. One ancient teacher compared life to releasing an arrow toward a distant target. Before the arrow leaves the bow, every detail deserves complete attention. The stance must be balanced, the breathing steady, the aim carefully chosen. But once the string is released, the arrow belongs to the wind. No amount of worrying can redirect it. The archer who continues twisting after release only loses balance. So it is with our actions. Prepare carefully. Act completely. Relate peacefully. There is quiet strength in surrender. This surrender is often misunderstood. It does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means abandoning illusion. It means accepting that the universe contains countless variables beyond personal control, while still choosing to live honorably within those limits. Ancient mystics often described surrender as opening the clenched fist of the heart. A closed hand cannot receive. An open hand can both give and receive freely. When fear loosens its grip, generosity naturally expands. You begin serving others rather than constantly calculating personal reward. You help because kindness reflects who you are. You work because excellence becomes an expression of character. You love because love itself enriches the giver. Unexpectedly, life often responds differently. The person no longer chasing admiration frequently earns genuine respect. The one no longer desperate for wealth often develops the discipline that creates lasting prosperity. The individual no longer forcing happiness discovers quiet joy already present in ordinary moments. Freedom arrives quietly, not because the world changes first, because the heart finally stops fighting every wave. Relish the outcome. Keep the purpose. That is where peace begins. An old account preserved among merchants traveling the ancient Silk Road tells of a master carpet weaver whose work became famous across distant kingdoms. Young apprentices asked how he created such extraordinary beauty. They expected him to reveal a secret pattern. Instead, he smiled and continued weaving. "I do not weave for applause," he finally said. "I weave because each thread deserves my full attention." Years later, when his carpets hung in royal courts, he remained exactly the same man who had quietly worked in a simple workshop. His greatest masterpiece had never been the carpet. It had been the peaceful heart that learned to weave without attachment. Chapter 10. Ancient Wisdom of Unexpected Success. History remembers victories. Ancient wisdom remembers the journeys that made those victories possible. Hid within monasteries, marketplaces, mountain villages, and desert caravans are stories that have survived not because they describe extraordinary miracles, but because they reveal extraordinary ways of seeing ordinary life. Their message remains surprisingly consistent. Success rarely arrives where it is desperately chased. It often appears where wisdom has quietly prepared the ground. One of the oldest parables, tells of a farmer whose horse ran away into the mountains. His neighbors gathered, shaking their heads. "What terrible misfortune," they said. The farmer simply replied, "Perhaps." Several days later, the horse returned, bringing with it several magnificent wild horses. The neighbors celebrated. "What wonderful fortune," the farmer answered again, "Perhaps." Soon afterward, his son attempted to ride one of the untamed horses and broke his leg. Again, the neighbors mourned. Again, the farmer quietly answered, "Perhaps." Not long afterward, soldiers arrived to recruit every healthy young man for a distant war. Because of his injured leg, the farmer's son remained home. The villagers finally understood. Events reveal their meaning slowly. The wise resist judging life too quickly. Patience sees farther than certainty. Another story speaks of a young archer determined to become the finest marksman in his kingdom. Each day he practiced until his hands blistered. Yet the harder he strained, the farther his arrows drifted from their target. Frustrated, he sought an elderly master living deep within the forest. The old teacher watched silently before asking one question, "Are you aiming at the target?" "Of course," replied the young man. "No," the master answered gently, "you are aiming at victory." The difference puzzled the student. For months, the master forbade him from competitions. Instead, he learned to breathe with the wind, to feel the bow become an extension of his own body, and to release each arrow without craving success. Eventually, something remarkable happened. The arrows found their mark almost effortlessly. Skill had replaced tension, presence had replaced fear. The greatest target had never stood before him, it had lived within him. Ancient Zen teachers preserved another unforgettable lesson. A respected scholar once traveled great distances, hoping to receive wisdom from a quiet monk. Throughout the meeting, the scholar eagerly explained everything he already knew. The monk listened politely, while pouring tea. Soon the cup overflowed. Tea spilled across the table. The scholar exclaimed, "The cup is full." The monk nodded. "So is your mind. How can anything new enter?" That simple image has survived for centuries because it speaks to every generation. Certainty often becomes the greatest barrier to growth. Minds learn. Open hearts receive. Ancient travelers also loved the metaphor of the river. A mighty river begins as a small spring hidden among rocks. It does not argue with mountains or complain about obstacles. When cliffs appear, it flows around them. When valleys open, it widens naturally. Over countless years, it shapes entire landscapes without violence. Its strength lies not in force. It lies in persistence. Human lives often unfold the same way. Those who adapt continue moving. Those who refuse every obstacle frequently become trapped by it. History offers countless examples. Many celebrated philosophers endured exile before gaining influence. Inventors experienced repeated failures before discovering lasting solutions. Artists were often ignored during their own lifetimes, only to inspire generations yet unborn. Their greatness did not emerge because every attempt succeeded. It emerged because they refused to measure their worth by temporary outcomes. They remained faithful to the work itself. This is one of the oldest secrets shared across civilizations. Unexpected success rarely belongs to those obsessed with immediate reward. It belongs to those who quietly cultivate patience, integrity, humility, and steady effort, while allowing time to complete what human striving alone cannot accomplish. The ancient masters therefore left behind a final invitation. Become less concerned with controlling tomorrow. Become more devoted to honoring today. Plant faithfully. Learn humbly. Fod generously. Walk patiently. The harvest has its own appointed season. A true account from the early centuries of the Silk Road tells of an elderly potter whose humble bowls were treasured by merchants from Persia to China. One traveler asked why his simple workshop attracted buyers from kingdoms filled with richer craftsmen. The old artisan smiled as he shaped another vessel upon the wheel. "I stopped trying to make famous bowls many years ago," he said. "I began trying to make honest ones." His reputation spread farther than he ever intended, not because he pursued recognition, but because he pursued excellence with quiet devotion. Long after his name faded from memory, his teaching remained. The finest achievements are often born the moment ambition gives way to faithful craftsmanship. Chapter 11. The Great Return to Inner Freedom. For thousands of years, civilizations rose and fell. Kingdoms disappeared beneath sand, libraries burned. Empires collapsed beneath the weight of their own ambition. Languages changed, borders shifted. Yet beneath all these changes, one remarkable truth quietly survived. The greatest teachers rarely agreed on politics, customs, or rituals, but they repeatedly pointed toward the same destination, not outward, inward, across mountains, deserts, monasteries, temples, and academies. The wisest men and women insisted that the deepest freedom could never be given by the world, because it was never created by the world. It already lived within the human spirit. Different traditions used different words, yet they described the same journey. The Buddha taught that suffering fades when attachment loosens its grip upon the heart. Taoist sages spoke of returning to the effortless harmony that exists beneath endless striving. Stoic philosophers reminded their students that peace begins when we stop surrendering our inner world to changing circumstances. Hermetic teachers declared that transformation starts within before it ever appears without. Gnostic mystics whispered that every human being carries a forgotten divine spark waiting to awaken. Different languages, one invitation: return to yourself. This is perhaps the oldest pilgrimage in human history. It requires no ship, no army, no fortune, only honesty. Imagine standing before a perfectly still lake at sunrise. When the water remains calm, every mountain, cloud, and star appears with astonishing clarity. But when the surface becomes disturbed, the reflection fragments into confusion. The mountains themselves never changed, only the water. The mind behaves in the same way. Most people spend years attempting to rearrange the mountains of life, while forgetting to calm the lake through which they perceive them. The ancients understood this hidden relationship. Inner order changes outer experience, not because the world magically transforms overnight, but because perception itself becomes clearer. A fearful mind notices danger everywhere. A grateful mind notices opportunity. An angry mind discovers enemies. A compassionate mind discovers fellow travelers carrying invisible burdens. The outer world often reflects the quality of the inner observer. Modern psychology quietly confirms much of what these ancient traditions intuited through observation alone. Human attention constantly filters reality. Thousands of impressions pass before our senses each hour, yet consciousness selects only a tiny fraction for awareness. What we repeatedly expect influences what we repeatedly notice. What we repeatedly notice gradually shapes what we believe. Belief influences behavior. Behavior shapes destiny. The cycle quietly continues. Ancient wisdom recognized this long before laboratories existed. One wandering teacher explained it beautifully. If a traveler wears red-colored glass before his eyes, every valley appears touched by crimson. The valleys have not changed. Remove the glass, and another world appears. Most people never question the invisible lenses through which they see life. Fear becomes a lens. Pride becomes a lens. Resentment becomes a lens. So does hope. So does humility. Freedom begins the moment we recognize that we have been looking through the glass rather than at reality itself. This recognition requires courage. The ego prefers certainty. Wisdom prefers discovery. That is why every ancient path begins with self-observation rather than self-condemnation. Notice your thoughts. Notice your reactions. Notice your fears. Notice your desires. Do not rush to judge them. Simply become acquainted with them. Awareness itself begins the transformation. The Taoists compared this process to muddy water settling naturally when left undisturbed. The Buddha compared it to watching clouds drift across an open sky. Hermetic philosophers described polishing an ancient mirror until it reflected light once more. The images differ. The practice remains the same. Stop fighting every thought. Observe, understand, release. Gradually something remarkable happens. Life becomes less about controlling events and more about mastering presence. You no longer seek peace in tomorrow because you begin discovering it within today. You no longer measure yourself entirely by achievement because character quietly becomes more valuable than applause. You no longer fear every uncertainty because trust slowly replaces compulsion. This is the great return, not toward becoming someone new, toward remembering what anxiety caused you to forget. Freedom has never depended entirely upon circumstances. It has always depended upon consciousness. The ancient masters did not ask humanity to escape the world. They asked humanity to stop becoming imprisoned by it. Every tradition eventually reaches this same river. Cross it, and the journey home begins. A story preserved among early travelers tells of an elderly guide who spent decades leading caravans across vast deserts. Young merchants often asked how he never became lost, despite endless dunes that changed shape with every passing wind. The old guide smiled and pointed upward. "I do not follow the sand," he said. "I follow the stars. The sand changes every day. The heavens remain." Years later, those travelers realized that he had never spoken only about deserts. He had been speaking about life itself. Those who navigate by changing circumstances wander endlessly. Those who navigate by timeless wisdom eventually find their way home. Chapter 12. You already possess what you seek. Imagine spending your entire life searching for a priceless treasure hidden somewhere beyond distant mountains. You cross deserts. You sail dangerous seas. You climb frozen peaks. You grow older with every mile. Finally, after decades of searching, an old hermit quietly tells you that the treasure had been buried beneath your own home since childhood. Most ancient wisdom traditions tell exactly this story, not literally, spiritually. Human beings spend enormous energy seeking outside themselves what can only be awakened within: recognition, security, peace, wholeness, meaning. The Gnostic teachers called it the forgotten kingdom. They taught that humanity had become so fascinated by the outer world that it gradually forgot the divine light quietly residing within every person. The tragedy was never that the treasure disappeared. The tragedy was forgetting where to look. Hermetic philosophers expressed a similar insight. They believed that human consciousness participates in something infinitely greater than individual identity. The more clearly a person understands themselves, the more harmoniously they begin participating in the deeper order woven throughout existence. Self-knowledge becomes sacred knowledge. The Buddha approached the mystery from another direction. He observed that endless craving convinces the mind that happiness always exists somewhere else. I will finally be enough when. I will finally rest after. I will finally become. Yet each achievement simply creates another destination. The horizon continues moving. The race never ends. Socrates offered perhaps the simplest remedy. Know yourself, not your possessions, not your reputation, not the opinions others carry about you. Know the quiet awareness capable of observing every changing circumstance without becoming identical to it. This is where the search begins to dissolve. A remarkable psychological shift occurs when we stop living from lack and begin living from wholeness. Instead of asking, "What must I acquire before I can be peaceful?" we begin asking, "From what kind of heart shall I live today?" That question transforms everything. Generosity replaces competition, presence replaces hurry, curiosity replaces fear, gratitude replaces endless comparison. The outer circumstances may remain remarkably similar. The inner experience becomes entirely different. This does not mean abandoning growth. Ancient wisdom never encouraged laziness or passivity. A healthy tree continues growing throughout its life, but it grows because growth expresses its nature, not because it believes it is worthless while still a sapling. There is profound freedom in this distinction. You continue learning, you continue serving, you continue creating. Yet your worth no longer depends entirely upon reaching another destination. You begin acting from fullness rather than emptiness. The Taoists called this effortless harmony. The Buddhists described it as freedom from attachment. The Gnostics recognized it as awakening. Hermetic teachers viewed it as remembering one's participation in the greater order of life. Different words, one experience, the end of unnecessary striving. There is a quiet mystery hidden inside every sunrise. The sun never struggles to become the sun. It simply shines because shining belongs to its nature. Likewise, compassion belongs naturally to an awakened heart. Wisdom belongs naturally to a humble mind. Peace belongs naturally to one who no longer wages war against reality. The ancient masters therefore left humanity with a challenge far more demanding than acquiring wealth or influence. Become fully awake. Observe your thoughts before believing them. Notice fear before obeying it. Practice gratitude before complaint. Offer kindness before judgment. Listen before speaking. Remain present before rushing toward tomorrow. Small practices, extraordinary consequences. For a lifetime spent awakening changes not only the individual, but everyone whose life touches theirs. Pack-krents become gentler, friends become wiser, communities become stronger. Legacy grows quietly, not through force, through presence. Perhaps this has been the hidden lesson beneath every sacred tradition. The destination was never somewhere beyond the horizon. It was hidden beneath the noise of the restless mind. The journey was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about remembering the quiet wisdom that had patiently waited beneath every fear, every ambition, and every illusion of separation. Ancient records tell of an old stone mason who spent nearly 60 years restoring forgotten temples. A young apprentice once asked, where he had learned such remarkable craftsmanship. The old man rested his chisel and smiled. "I spent many years searching for great teachers," he said. "Eventually, I discovered that every stone was already teaching me." "What changed?" the apprentice asked. "I finally became quiet enough to listen." The apprentice remembered those words for the rest of his life, for he realized that the master's greatest lesson had never concerned stone. It had concerned the human heart. And perhaps that is the final wisdom shared across every ancient path. The universe was never waiting for you to become someone else. It was waiting for you to stop running from the wisdom that had quietly lived within you all along.